Tell us why you want to be the next mayor of Austin.
Well, I'm running for mayor because our city needs a leader who stands for all Austinites. Not big money, not big donors, and certainly not Governor Abbott. We in Austin have seen our cost of living go through the roof over the last 30 years. We are the biggest, fastest growing city for millionaires. Our income inequality continues to increase. And over the last decade, our percentage of Black and Latino residents continues to decrease. I think we have a billionaire's mayor who's a millionaire himself and has gotten wealthy while he's in office. I'm not saying he's done that illegally, but I think he's part of the problem. Working people have been pushed out, and we need a mayor who's going to stand for working people, maintain our middle class, and fight for investments in workforce, education, affordable housing, and living wage jobs.
You say you believe Mayor Watson is part of the problem. How
Yes.
so?
Like I said, he has become a very wealthy man while in office, which he is allowed to do. But I think that is emblematic of our city. It has become a city for millionaires, and I think he represents the millionaire class. And I think asking for 4 more years, look, 40% of his donations come from 3 West Austin zip codes. The most common employer of his donors is real estate. And the single most common employer of his companies that employ his donors is Endeavor Real Estate. These are the folks that have been pushing Austinites out. We have 30% of our homes that are bought by institutional investors, and ordinary families can't compete with that. Institutional investors have done very well in Austin over the last few decades, and those are the folks donating to the mayor. I have fought for community investments as the director of Central Texas Interfaith, hundreds of millions of dollars in workforce, education, living wage jobs. I also led the organizing effort at the state level to kill the state's largest corporate tax giveaway program, Chapter 313. It took $1 billion potential school funding every year, gave it to the wealthiest oil and gas companies. All but one time, the mayor voted for that program as state senator. I led the organizing effort that killed it in 2021, and the oil and gas industry wanted to bring it back. We stopped it, and they were only able to pass a reformed program. So that's what I fought for. And I think the mayor talking about an affordability agenda after he is the single most recognizable politician who has gotten wealthy himself in Austin, I think he represents the folks that have pushed working families out of the city.
Tell us, what about your background do you believe makes you uniquely qualified to serve as mayor during this particular time?
So I grew up in a working class town in the eastern coal region of Pennsylvania. By the time I grew up, the economy was devastated because of the mines that shut down in the 1950s. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Very proud town, very tightly knit town. But the house that my mom raised me and my 2 brothers as a single mom in 1985 for $30,000, she sold for $15,000 in 2008. She saw the value drop in half. But at least she was able to buy a home. A lot of folks can't because of discrimination, because of their income. So, that upbringing to me and understanding what it means to be raised by a single mom who fights for her kids. And I was a high school teacher here in Austin. When I moved here in the mid-90s, 97 through 2002, taught at Johnston High School, now East Side Early College High on the east side. Great students, great families, but we had 7 principals in 5 years. That really showed me the inequality in Austin. And that's where I got involved in community organizing. First with Education Austin, the teachers union, as a member, and then with the organization I led for 12 years, Central Texas Interfaith, which is a grassroots faith and labor coalition that fights in working class and communities of color and middle class communities for the community. I didn't get wealthy during the time, they paid me well, but it was a nonprofit, and I think I have represent ordinary folks, and have represented ordinary folks my whole career. And I think that's what distinguishes me from the mayor, is that lens of seeing the community from the ground up and seeing the struggles that folks face from working with them every day. This is his 8th election in 27 years, and I think it's time to turn the page.
You know, there are several issues impacting all of us here in Austin, and at top of mind is water, right? Austin has had challenges in managing water and ensuring that people always have access to clean water. I want to know what steps you would take as mayor to ensure that we have enough water, not only in this moment, but also for the future.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, some of the major users of water are large industrial users, microchip plants, Tesla. Need these companies, they're important companies, but they are some of the biggest users of water, and they get big public subsidies at the federal, state, and local level. And they often get sweetheart rates from our utilities. So I would make sure that they use the best and most effective water conservation efforts. Yes, we should conserve as ordinary residents, but the gallons of water that are used at a chip plant is astronomical compared to a neighborhood. That's number one. Number two, we need to protect our lakes and our aquifer in the recharge zone, and making sure that we don't develop in a way that provides runoff or potentially pollutes our water. And number three, the state estimates about $88 billion of need from leaky pipes and infrastructure. And there's a story that came out last week. I forget if it was how many Olympic-sized swimming pool. I think it was 8,000 or 80,000 per year of water that just we lose it because of our eroding infrastructure. So we've got to be able to invest in protecting our water infrastructure. We've got to protect our lakes and aquifers, and the biggest industrial users have got to use the best conservation.
I want to ask you about that first point, those industrial users. Are you suggesting that you go back and renegotiate deals with some of those companies?
Yeah, to the extent that we're subsidizing them. Number one, I don't think they should be paying, to the extent that they pay a lower rate than residential customers, number one. Number two, anytime we're looking at giving them public subsidies, and when I decided to run for mayor, when my organization was down, asking the mayor for a meeting and more time just to look at a public subsidy deal to NXP, a chip manufacturer. We never got the meeting, and we never got the answers to our questions, and they passed the deal. Now, it may have been a decent deal, but we didn't have the time to go through it. So I think when we negotiate those kind of deals, and $1 million, even $1 million is at stake of public money, that's the point at which we should negotiate that they're upholding the highest conservation efforts. So we give sweetheart rates, and we give tax breaks to these companies. At the point of negotiating those deals is where we have the most leverage.
And so I just want to be clear, you're talking about then moving forward, because the other companies, the ones that you've mentioned, I mean, they're locked into contracts at this point.
I'll do whatever we can to protect our water. And if we have leverage to be able to renegotiate, we'll renegotiate.
You know, another issue that impacts all of us, obviously, is housing and affordability. But it's not a new issue. It's something that we've been talking about for years and years and years now. The need to increase the housing supply, the need to deal with the occupancy rates, to lower the rents. How do you think the city can truly move the needle on housing?
Look, the biggest challenge, number one, we have been a growing city, doubled every 20 years in population. Downtown development and the role of institutional investors, over 30%, a third of our homes are bought by private equity, Wall Street, private investors, LLCs, that has been driving up the cost of housing. And frankly, these have been the core of the mayor's PAC is littered with private equity and real estate investors. Okay, these folks have been driving up and bidding up the price of homes, and some of them owners of downtown buildings and developers of downtown buildings. That has driven up our real estate cost, okay? So that was before the council passed land use reforms, and it'll be a problem after. Now, I'm open, I thought we needed to update the land use code. I would have fought for more anti-displacement measures, and I would have fought for measures to help ordinary homeowners and buyers compete with private equity. Down payment assistance, mortgage assistance, loan assistance for ADUs if you're moderate or low income. And I'm also have a long track record in supporting affordable housing and rental assistance. All of those things will help folks be more competitive. But But again, unless we curb the role of institutional investors, private equity, I don't think we're going to, I don't think any changes in the land use code is going to be a silver bullet. And again, I question the extent to which the mayor is beholden to those folks. This week, I testified at the Public Safety Commission. The mayor is proposing the city pay $107 million from Brandywine Realty for a new combined police headquarters. Now, I think that is an important topic to discuss. We should discuss, does a joint headquarters make sense? Should we do it over the recharge zone? I personally am concerned about that. But that company, the Monday before he announced that deal, it was disclosed that they made a $10,000 donation to his political action committee, okay? Now, I understand candidates don't run their PACs and you can't coordinate, but that was a public disclosure on a Monday. And then on a Friday, he announces a proposed $107 million deal to that same company. To me, it taints the process. And that's why I'm concerned we have a mayor that is in the pocket of big money, Wall Street, oil and gas millionaires, and private equity.
I want to take just one step back to something that you mentioned when we're talking about housing and moving the needle, and you mentioned assistance, right?
Yep.
Down payment assistance,
That's right.
loan assistance. How are we going to pay for that?
So my organization during the pandemic, we had an influx of ARPA dollars and there was a pronounced need, but we led the charge to secure, it was over $40 million, close to $50 million from the city and county to say in 2020, one of the biggest needs is rental assistance. So we fought for that. In 2021, we fought and created the political will working with the mayor, city council, and the county judge and the county commissioners to invest $200 million in permanent housing for those experiencing homelessness. Now there were ARPA dollars, those were the COVID dollars, so it was more plentiful, but the need was even greater. And a lot of those projects are coming online now. So I don't know that we're going to get to where we have $50 million in rental assistance, but I still think what we're investing now is too little. And if we want to address homelessness, we have to address economic homelessness and families that are one step away. So yes, it's an investment, and yes, we're going to need to find the money, but we prevent spending a lot more down the line for families who are displaced, families who are having to double up with another family, families who are living in garage apartments that are unsanctioned. So we need to prevent folks from slipping into that category of homelessness. Now, I think things like ending our sweetheart deals with the large industrial users, there are $1.8 billion of already voter-approved bond money that is being slow-walked and not being spent. That money should have been spent. And some of that is for housing, some of that is for parks and green space. But if we spend that $1.8 billion, we're going to have a stimulus effect and we'll bring in more tax revenues. So that's another place I think we should have spent that money. We would be getting greater tax revenues and we'd have more money for things like rental assistance and mortgage assistance.
But do you have any ideas? Obviously, that money isn't going to get spent. Those bonds aren't going to get issued overnight. So how would you, or what would you like to see some cuts made to in order to put more money into those assistance programs?
I think the problem is we're looking at, when I went down to the budget this year, I said three things, maybe four. I said, we need to increase our investments in workforce development for underemployed adults, programs like Capital Idea, ones that take, folks that are in the category of the working poor and train them to be nurses. Within 3 years, they go from $11,000 to $50,000. We invest in that, and we continue to invest in education programs, which the city funds, after-school programs, parent support specialists. My former organization helped create some of those programs and fought for them over the years. That is going to be our biggest rate of return. And if we invest, okay, we cut out the sweetheart deals and we make sure we're treating our corporate customers the same on the same level playing field, and we spend the bond money that's already been approved, it's going to free up other money in the budget. So that's where I would go.
When we think about housing, what the rent costs, what the mortgage costs, that's one piece of it, right? Another piece that the city directly impacts is fees and service fees, utility fees. The council used to, for years and years, had this mantra of growth can pay for itself and we don't need to necessarily increase those fees. But now it seems as though the fees are increasing every time we see a new budget. What do you think has changed and what would you like to see?
I don't know, there was a proposal that they're going to have to double the capacity of one of our water facilities. Well, the new growth and the new developers should be paying for that. Okay, existing customers shouldn't be paying if we're building out capacity in our utilities and our infrastructure because of new development. Those who are responsible for that development should pay for it. Okay, not existing customers. So that's one way, and the other is, you know, there is this way of kind of holding taxes down, but then you kind of jack up fees in the budget. You know, we need to look at that honestly. An increase in fee is like an increase in a tax, and so we got to look at the overall impact of any budget, the tax impact and the fee impact as well. But again, in general, if we're talking about new development, okay, you know, those who are producing that, and if they're private developers, ought to be paying for that increased capacity.
I want to talk to you about homelessness. I think it is very easy to hear candidates and hear people say we have to end homelessness, but ending homelessness is a moving target, right? Because different people experience homelessness at different points in times of their lives. What metric would you use if you're elected as mayor to really measure how effective your policies are on having an impact on homelessness?
So number one, you know, there is the point in time count that is done, and those numbers have gone from a few thousand to about 6,000 in folks that are, you know, literally on the streets or in overnight shelters. Where we have done well is what I already mentioned. My organization really created the political will. We didn't run programs, and I've stepped down from that organization to run for mayor, but created the political will to invest $200 million in places like Community First Village, foundation communities, and other nonprofits. That's where that money went. We're doing well there. Those units are coming online and they have over a 90% success rate. So if we get folks into permanent housing, they tend to stay there. Where we need to invest more, and where we're going to drive down those numbers, is if we invest in our overnight and emergency shelters and transitional housing, because those are the point of entry into services. And if we're under capacity, then we're not getting folks into transitional or permanent housing. So if we can invest more in those two areas in the same way we've invested in permanent housing, I think we can drive those numbers down. At the same time, if we're measuring success, we've got to look at families that are in the category of the working poor, that are at risk of being economically homeless. School districts use the federal definition of homelessness, which tends to be about 4 times as large as what we would count the point in time count, because they're counting families that are doubling up, couch surfing, living with relatives because they can't afford their own place. That's considered being homeless by the federal definition. Like I said, living in temporary shelters or living in like a garage apartment that's not up to code. All of those by the federal definition are considered. So if we're not driving those numbers down, then I don't think we're really addressing the problem.
One of our viewers, C. Goodwin from Southwest Austin, wants to know how you will specifically address mental health treatment and drug addiction and rehab within the homeless community if you're elected mayor.
Yeah, I mean, prevention, treatment, and recovery. Those, you know, I would invest in prevention, treatment, and recovery, and we're not going to do it alone as a city. Okay, Austin Public Health and our resources have got to work with Integral Health and work with the county and work with the state. So we have an integrated strategy and investments in mental health. So we've got to work, and with the school district as well, and with ACC. So I think we've got to do better across the board in working in intergovernmental strategies so we're not siloed, number one. And then I think we got to step back and look at what are the pressures and challenges that lead people into, you know, challenges of mental health or drug substance abuse, and how do we alleviate those economic and social pressures as well. So we really got to look at kind of a broad spectrum of investments as a community so that folks, you know, the pressure, you know, that sometimes leads folks into substance abuse or mental health challenges, we alleviate those at the front end.
Transportation directly ties into affordability.
Yep.
You know, if people can't live here, then they have to drive here, they have to commute here, it leads to traffic. It's all tied into that. Austinites obviously recognize this because they passed Project Connect, a very bold plan to build a rail system throughout the city.
Yep.
But what people voted for, what they thought they were going to get, obviously is not what they're going to get. How do you restore public confidence in Project Connect?
Project Connect. So I support Project Connect. We are not getting what we originally voted for, and there's been overruns. But I still think it is going to be good overall for our quality of life, our environment, and the blue-collar jobs that are created. Number one, I'd be the mayor that brings it in on time and on budget. One of those things is about $2.7 billion of it is for professional services. My understanding would be the white-collar jobs. I would put some of that money to more of that money to the blue-collar jobs to make sure the folks who build Project Connect are paid well and paid a living wage and the benefits that they deserve. I have a concern around how much we're investing in our bus system as well. We want to expand it under Project Connect. Some of those rapid metro lines are being delayed, especially the two on the east side. We've got to get those in on time. And I'm also concerned, as I'm told by the folks with the union, ATU, 75% of our bus drivers live outside the city. I mean, imagine that. It is shameful that we're not paying our bus drivers and mechanics enough to live in the city. And how counterproductive is that to have our bus drivers drive in than to take folks on public transportation in an effort to, partially have a positive impact on the environment. After 20 to 30 years, they still make about $30 an hour. So we need to treat them with dignity and respect and invest in them. And we can also talk about 35, unless that's a different question.
You can talk about 35.
35. So I-35, I signed on to the civil rights complaint, but it looks like the project will go forward. If the project goes forward, we need the caps and stitches project, the parks that would go over and overlay. I agree with that. We need it. My challenge is this deal was negotiated when the mayor was state senator, and he negotiated the deal. First, he wanted a toll road. Then the governor said no toll road. And what he failed to do, those caps and stitches are going to cost the city $800 million. Those should have been negotiated in the original deal. We're getting stuck with that bill because the mayor was unable to negotiate that in a state project. This is a state project. So I want to work to make sure the state pays for as much of those caps and stitches, almost $1 billion, the federal government and other entities. It reminds me of, when then Senator Watson negotiated the medical school, another state facility. It all should have been paid for by the state. We needed a medical school. But then he proposed that our taxpayers locally use $35 million a year from our healthcare district that's supposed to go for indigent healthcare. And now we're subsidizing the medical school from dollars that should go to indigent healthcare. And now we're learning that none of that is going to direct care. It should be going for reimbursable care. But it went into infrastructure, it went into some salaries, and it's very hard to trace those $35 million, which by state law are supposed to go to treating folks who are low income. It's now subsumed into the overall budget. We should have negotiated that the state pay for the medical school. So that's my critique of the mayor, is he needs to be a stronger negotiator. And we're getting some of the big ticket things that we're stuck with the bill as taxpayers. He was responsible for and could have negotiated with the state.
I want to go back to the original question, which was about Project Connect. And so we were chatting about, you voiced your support of Project Connect and the need to move forward.
Yep.
There are some complications, though, with Project Connect because of lawsuits dealing with the funding and the funding mechanisms for Project Connect. Do you think that it is being funded the best way through the Austin Transit Partnership?
I think, absent a court overturning it, yes, I support the current method of funding because we need to be a world-class city in terms of transportation, and we can't take a step backwards. So yes, I would support this, the city moving forward with this, with the funding mechanism. If it gets overturned in the courts, then I think we go back to the drawing board and have a community-wide conversation and reset and say, okay, what are our biggest needs? And we restart that conversation.
Let's talk about public safety. There seems to be a disconnect between what people expect to get from the police department when they call 911 and what they actually get. People are just not able to get an officer to come out to situations where it is perhaps not life-threatening, right? A car crash or your home has been burglarized and there's no longer a threat there. You know, it's not happening though. When they call 911, they want to see an officer come. It's not happening. How are you going to fix it?
Well, first of all, we need to pay all of our public safety officers well. That's going to be part of recruitment, okay? And we need to pay them well. At the top of what we talk about in the city is our peer cities that have the same kind of economic prospect as Austin. That we need to be at the top of that, and we need to recruit from within our neighborhoods so that our police force looks like and comes from and reflects the diversity of our city, and make sure they're trained. Can double down on our training that we do with race equity and community policing, so that the way in which the community and the police interact reflects our values. I think that's part of the challenge of filling the shortages, and when we fill those shortages, then I think response times are going to go down. Okay, so I think it starts with pay our officers well, and we need to recruit from the community. It's not just about money, but it's about making folks that want to work for our police force, and that part of that is making sure that it reflects the values of our community. Again, I think when we do that and we recruit more officers, then I think those response times will go down.
Obviously it's going to take some time to fill those 300 plus vacancies.
Yep.
It's contingent on that happening if the police contract that the council is poised to pass actually passes. But if you're elected mayor, when do you hope people can start to see a better functioning police department?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we need to take the time it needs to get a contract that is the right contract and is going to last.
So you're not a fan of the current contract that's on the table?
I think the mayor is pushing it through to get it through before the election.
But we didn't keep. So I hear what you're saying. Let's take a step back though. It's not like this got passed in 2023. I mean, it's taken a while for this to get to this point.
The way I would say is it's been stagnated for a while. I would have, if I were the mayor 2 years ago, there are two things I would have done. Number one, immediately implemented the Austin Police Oversight Act. Implement it. If there's something that got caught up in litigation, that gets litigated, but implement every part of it that we could. And I would have, including the elimination of the G file, and that would have gone to court. There's been another court, ruling today. So the courts have said the G file, there is no more G file, and the old files should not be grandfathered. That's one process. And negotiating with the police and negotiating a contract, I would have started from day one as well. What I think this mayor has done has tried to trade off all along bits and pieces of those two things, and I just think it's now come to pass that we have a contract in which it is unclear. And I know there's different opinions, the city attorney, but when this contract was announced a few weeks ago, the head of the APA, the Police Officers Association, said it grandfathered the G file, which are the files that were not open to public information. And we voted to make those public under the Police Oversight Act. So he said, okay, the old G files are grandfathered. The city said they're not. So there's a disagreement there. Now he's saying they are, but I think it's because the mayor is pressuring to get this done. The other thing is the budgetary impact. We need to pay our officers well, and we need to make sure there's enough money for other community investments like addressing homelessness, affordable housing, that keep our officers and our community safe. In the spring, the budget projections were dire, so we've got to have a tight budget. In the summer, when they were fighting for community services, a few more dollars came about. Well, now we need money for the contract, and now the budgetary outlook is rosy. What I think is happening, and I think the mayor is pushing so hard, in the same way he pushed for DPS to come into the neighborhoods unilaterally, in the same way he's pushing for this deal for one of his donors, he's pushing for a police contract. Slow it down and let's get it right. We have a lot more information than we did 2 years ago. We have court rulings, and we need a contract, and I believe we need a contract, but I'm glad they delayed it 2 weeks. But the idea that they've been negotiating for 2 years, I think there's been a stalemate, and this should have been negotiated earlier. So I want a contract, but I think the language around the G file should be clarified in the contract, because there was a disagreement. and we can't just smooth over that disagreement.
So I want to talk about some of the things that you mentioned there, because it's a little bit of some conflicting things that I see that you're saying. You said that the mayor should have automatically implemented the Police Oversight Act.
Yes,
the mayor didn't.
I think.
But let me finish.
That.
The mayor didn't have the authority to do it. It was a ballot petition. The entire council would have had to vote to do it. They didn't. They voted to send it to the voters. And then we had a second prop that was then brought forward that competed against the other props. So you remember we had two props on the ballot related to police oversight at the same time.
The one that implemented the more robust oversight.
The prop A that passed, right? Exactly. Yeah. The other prop, but I'm saying.
And the council voted for it to be implemented. But I think then it got slow walked.
They voted to send it to voters. The council could have just accepted it as it was written.
And it passed. But I'm saying from that point on, the council's direction was the voters passed this, implemented city management, and that's where I think it got slow walked.
And you think that was intentional? You're saying you think that was intentional?
I think it was, yes, because I think it was always used as a bargaining chip around kind of stop and start negotiations for the last few years.
And there was also conversation even from the police association, about waiting to see the outcome of that election before moving forward with the contract. Do you feel like that was a fair thing?
Yeah, but what I'm saying from that point, once that election happened, and that was a few years ago, when that election happened, that's when the city, there should have been no question, it should have been implemented. And if there is any litigation, then we let that play out, like around the G-file. And I just think that there was this thinking that let's kind of, use this as a bargaining chip for getting a contract. And I think that's why we end up with a contract that is not fully baked.
So how much longer do you think we should go without a police contract? I
think we should move as quickly as we can, but that language around the G-file right now, which allows, the police association to interpret it one way, or at least they had, and the city to interpret it another way, seems like a deal to say, well, we're not going to settle the grandfathering here, really. It's going to be settled in court and the legislature. I think they need to write into the contract unambiguous language that says there is no grandfathering of the G-file. That's one thing. Once that's taken care of, I think we can move forward. And then the second thing is that we just need to ensure, given that we all want to pay our officers well and competitively, and we want to do that because we want to recruit the officers and be competitive to recruit officers, that share Austin's values, that it doesn't undermine other investments in our community that also keep the community safe. So once those two things are ironed out, I think we move forward. I just don't think we should push it through just because we want something before the election.
Jose from South Austin wants to know why you think Austinites should not re-elect Mayor Watson.
As I've said, I think he is a mayor for billionaires. I think he is a millionaire himself and represents that class. And I think he's become a millionaire while in office. And again, I'm not saying he did that illegally. He's allowed to work while he's a state senator, but he made a lot of money. And I don't think he represents the kind of perspective that we need to really solve affordability. And I don't think he has stood up. I haven't heard him once since been in office stand up to Greg Abbott. The DEI cuts that happened in Austin, okay, the attacks on civil rights. He did make a statement around Ken Paxton. Okay, I'll grant him that, but that should be happening every time that there's an attack. Now, he says he doesn't want to make unnecessary enemies. I don't either. But I'm saying when we are attacked, when the state cuts DEI and UT ends its LGBT center, ends its student immigrant center, the Monarch Center, and its multicultural center, I called on the mayor to stand up and convene community leaders, organizations, students to figure out which of those programs we could replace. We don't even have an LGBT center here. So I think it's kind of been like a Stockholm syndrome where I know he's worked with, and in the state leadership, and I say I will work with state leaders. Everything that I helped pass at the legislature or helped kill was done in a bipartisan way. But I will work with state leaders, but I won't work for them. And I certainly won't stand with the governor and bring DPS into our neighborhoods or give his deputy chief of staff a special favor for his kids' charter, or hire my PAC director and make him the interim city manager. So I think that we have a mayor who has been compromised, and he's unable to stand up to state leaders that attack us, and I don't think he's in a position to solve the affordability crisis. It is the end of his career. He's had many bites at the apple. I've spent my career fighting for working people, passing hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in workforce education, living wage jobs, and passing legislation at the legislature with bipartisan support for workforce, helping expand school equity, and killing bad legislation like Chapter 313, which took $1 billion, the biggest corporate tax giveaway program in the state, took $1 billion in potential school funding, gave it to oil and gas companies. But I think that's the kind of fighter we need, somebody that stands with ordinary Austinites and represents ordinary Austinites. And I just think this mayor has, you know, I'll tell you, he had a job at the hobby school during the pandemic, and he had an opportunity to mentor the next generation of elected leaders. But that wasn't good enough for him. He had to do it himself. He had to come back because he's the only one that can be mayor. He's the only one that can do the job. And that's how he operates. The way he brings DPS in, 3 lawsuits that overturned his rules on trying to quash public input, slow walking a climate bond that could have been on. Let the voters decide if we need a climate bond passed this time. But he punted on that. It has been that same heavy-handed leadership style. He thinks he's the only one that can do this job and the only one that can make these decisions. Well, I think it's time for new leadership. We don't need someone who thinks they need to act for Austinites. Someone needs to act with Austinites, and that's the kind of mayor I'd be.
You know, if you're elected mayor after that 4-year term has come to a close, what is the one tangible thing you want that would be different in the city?
We need to be a city that is at the center of an economic region, okay, a 5-county area, 7-county area, that is as diverse as the entire region. I don't want us to be a wealthy, whiter, less diverse core of an economic region in which the working class and people of color are pushed out. I want diversity in Austin, and I want an Austin where if you're a teacher, okay, you're a blue-collar worker, you can afford to buy a home here. If you want to live in Bastrop and work in Austin, if you want to work in Austin and live in Austin and work in Williamson County, that those are all options. But my problem is right now those aren't options for most Austinites. The working class, if they want to work in Austin, have got to drive in like the bus drivers I talked about, and then drive buses within Austin. So I want a diverse Austin economically, racially, in terms of age, so that we don't become one of these cities in which no one can afford to live there anymore. And the inequality is so great that you either get rich or you leave.
And you believe that could be done in one 4-year term?
I plan to do it in 8 years, but I mean, I plan to have an 8-year term.
But my question is, after a first term, after a 4-year term, what is the one tangible
thing?
We'll
get 75% there, and then in the second term we'll get 100% there. But I think that is, making tremendous progress towards flipping the script and becoming more diverse, having a stronger working class living in Austin, restoring our middle class. If we are taking great strides within 4 years and we are reshaping Austin into the diverse and progressive city it is supposed to be, that's what I would consider success.
Final thoughts for our viewers on why they should elect you.
I think, I am running a grassroots campaign. I'm the only candidate that had to, for most of this campaign, I had to step down my job from day one. And I am told that on the day that I announced by one of the former clergy in my organization that someone, a high-ranking staff member from the mayor's office, called my office angry. They were angry that I had run. Well, I'm glad they didn't want me in the race, but they got me, okay? So I am fighting for working folks, okay? I'm not taking money from Brian Sheffield, oil and gas billionaire, Trump and Abbott donor, which his PAC is doing, and I ask if that's why he slow-walked the bond. Okay, I'm going to fight for ordinary people. I don't, you look at our financial disclosures, you know, I own a house, I have some college loans, okay? The mayor is a millionaire. The mayor gets a monthly fruit shipment from a corporate law firm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I don't even understand that, okay? And he gets hundreds of thousands in revenue from all of his interests. I am someone who is a former teacher, community organizer, and has fought for working families their entire life, okay? And if we want to restore our working class and rebuild our middle class and not just be a city for millionaires, then I say check out GrecoForAustin.com and vote for me in the fall.